Don't underestimate the quiet girl she hunts without mercy ## Part 1. The silent observer, G1, Kim, sat in the corner of the crowded cantina, her eyes focused on the datapad in front of her. Around her, dozens of alien species talked, laughed, and conducted business. The massive trading station called Nexus Prime was always busy, always loud, but G1 preferred it that way. When everyone was making noise, no one noticed the quiet human girl in the corner. She had worked as a data clerk on the station for 6 months now. Every day was the same. She arrived at her small office, processed shipping manifests, and went home to her tiny quarters. The other workers barely knew her name. That was exactly how she wanted it. G-1 took a sip of her synthetic coffee and glanced around the cantina. She noticed everything, though no one would guess it. The Threen merchant in the far corner was nervous, constantly checking his device. The 2 Saurian dock workers near the entrance were arguing about credit splits. And at the bar, 3 Vrakan enforcers were drinking heavily. The Vrakan controlled Nexus Prime. They called themselves a security company. But everyone knew the truth. They were criminals who ran protection rackets, smuggling operations, and worse, workers who complained disappeared. Those who resisted ended up dead. The station's official government looked the other way because the Vrakan paid them well. G1 had learned to keep her head down. She processed her data, accepted her small paycheck, and minded her own business. That was the smart way to survive on Nexus Prime. The cantina door burst open. G1's eyes flicked up from her datapad. 3 more Vrakan enforcers entered, dragging someone between them. Guan's stomach tightened. It was Mira, the Centauri mechanic who worked in the docking bays. "Please." "I didn't do anything wrong," Mira cried out. Her blue skin had turned pale with fear. The lead Vrakan, a massive creature named Grath, laughed. "You refused to sign off on those ships. You said they weren't safe. That costs us money, because they'll explode in hyperspace." Mira protested. "I won't send people to their deaths." Grath struck her across the face. The sound echoed through the suddenly quiet cantina. Everyone looked away. Some left quickly. Others suddenly became very interested in their drinks. G1's hands remained steady on her datapad, but her jaw clenched. Mira had been kind to her. When G1 first arrived on the station, lost and alone, Mira had shown her where to find cheap meals and which areas to avoid. She was one of the few people who had treated the quiet human girl like a person. "You're coming with us," Grath said. "The boss wants to teach everyone what happens to troublemakers. You'll work the labor camps on Vorden 7 until you learn respect." Mira's eyes went wide with terror. Everyone knew about the labor camps. Few people came back from them. Those who did were broken shells of their former selves. The Vrakan dragged Mira toward the exit. As they passed G1's table, Mira's desperate eyes met hers for just a moment. There was no hope in that look, only the acceptance of someone who knew no help was coming. The cantina door closed. Conversations slowly resumed. Life on Nexus Prime went on. Another worker disappeared, another injustice occurred, and everyone pretended not to notice. That was how things worked here, G1 sat motionless for exactly 3 more minutes. Then she finished her coffee, gathered her datapad, and left. She walked to her quarters with the same unhurried pace she always used. Nothing in her expression suggested that anything unusual had happened. Inside her small room, G1 locked the door and stood in the darkness for a long moment. Then she moved to her closet and pushed aside the few clothes hanging there. Behind them was a hidden panel. She pressed her palm against it, and the panel slid open. Inside was equipment that no simple data clerk should possess. Compact weapons, hacking tools, tactical gear, and a combat knife that had seen considerable use. G1 stared at these items from a life she had left behind. She had come to Nexus Prime to escape her past. After years of working in Earth's Special Operations Division, she had wanted peace. She had wanted to be ordinary, to live a quiet life where her skills were never needed. She had thought she could leave that part of herself behind. But watching Mira being dragged away had reminded her of something important. Sometimes silence was just another word for cowardice. Sometimes keeping your head down meant watching good people suffer. Gi-won picked up the combat knife, testing its familiar weight in her hand. Then she activated her personal terminal and began accessing the station's networks. Using carefully observed security codes, for months she had watched and listened. She knew the Vraken's patrol patterns, their communication frequencies, and their operational procedures. She had told herself she was gathering this information out of habit, not planning. She had been lying to herself. 3 hours later, GH1 had mapped the entire Vraken operation on Nexus Prime. Trafficking routes, financial accounts, blackmail files, and evidence of murders. Everything was there if you knew where to look, and Ji-won knew exactly where to look. She also found Mira. The Centauri mechanic was being held in a detention facility in the lower levels. In 72 hours, she would be transferred to a transport ship heading to the labor camps. Gi-won composed a message and sent it through anonymous channels to Grath's personal cum device. The message was simple: release the Centauri. Last warning. She sat back and waited. An hour later, her terminal intercepted Grath's response. He was laughing about the message with his fellow enforcers, mocking whoever had sent it. They were placing bets on which foolish worker thought they could threaten the Raken. Ji-won allowed herself the smallest smile. Good. She had hoped they would refuse. She stood and began, changing into dark, flexible clothing. The quiet data clerk was gone. In her place was something the Vraken had never encountered before, a human who had chosen peace, but was perfectly capable of war. They had made a mistake taking Mira. An understandable mistake, but a fatal one. They were about to learn that you should never underestimate the quiet girl. Don't underestimate the quiet girl. She hunts without mercy. Part 2. The hunter emerges. Grath's body was discovered at 0600 hours station time. The massive Vraken enforcer was found in his quarters, dead from a single precise strike to his primary nerve cluster. Security footage from the corridor showed nothing unusual. No one had entered or left his room during the night. The news spread through Nexus Prime like wildfire. The Vraken, who had ruled through fear and violence, were suddenly afraid themselves. Their leader, a cruel being named Vorash, ordered a full investigation. Lockdown protocols went into effect in the lower levels. Armed patrols doubled on every deck. Ji-won arrived at her office at her usual time, carrying the same synthetic coffee she always bought. Her supervisor, a nervous threen named Kelix, barely looked at her as she sat down at her terminal. Terrible business with Grath, Kelix muttered, his 4 eyes darting around nervously. Yes, terrible, Ji-won replied quietly. Beginning her work on the day's shipping manifests, she was exactly what she appeared to be. A forgettable human clerk processing boring data. No one gave her a second look. That night, another Vraken died. This one was Vor, the enforcer who managed the trafficking operations. He was killed in a maintenance tunnel, his body discovered by a cleaning crew. Again, there was no evidence. No witnesses. No footage. By the third night, panic had set in among the Vraken ranks. 3 more enforcers were dead, each one connected to the trafficking ring. Someone was hunting them, picking them off one by one. And the Vraken had no idea who it was. Vorash brought in his best security chief to solve the problem. Krell was a Saurian with a reputation for brilliance and brutality. He arrived on the station with a team of investigators and began reviewing every piece of evidence. Ji-won continued her daily routine. Office work during the day, hunting at night. She moved through the station like a ghost, using maintenance shafts and forgotten corridors that most people didn't know existed. Her training from Earth's Special Operations Division had prepared her for exactly this kind of work. Deep cover operations in hostile territory, that was her specialty. She had spent years infiltrating criminal organizations and enemy installations. She knew how to blend in, how to be invisible, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. But this was personal in a way her old missions never were. Mira was still locked in the detention facility. Every night, Ji-won got closer to reaching her, dismantling the security systems one piece at a time. She was patient. Patience kept you alive. She was also systematically destroying the Vraken's operations. She sabotaged their communication networks, making coordination difficult. She stole encrypted data files, proving their crimes, and copied them to hidden servers. She drained their financial accounts slowly, transferring credits to accounts that would eventually reach the families of their victims. And she killed. Not everyone, only those who had personally committed atrocities. She had their names, their crimes, all documented in the files she had stolen. Every target was chosen carefully. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. On the seventh night, G1 made her move on the detention facility. She had disabled the security cameras in a pattern that made it look like a system malfunction. The guards would check the system, find nothing wrong, and go back to their posts. It would buy her 10 minutes. She dropped from a ventilation shaft into the facility's main corridor. 2 guards stood outside Mira's cell. G1 moved silently, using shadows and blind spots. The guards never saw her coming. The first guard went down with a pressure point strike to the neck. The second turned, reaching for his weapon, but G1 was already inside his reach. She disarmed him and knocked him unconscious in 3 efficient movements. She opened Mira's cell using a stolen access card. The Centauri mechanic looked up, her blue skin bruised and her expression hopeless. Then she saw G1, and her eyes went wide. G1. But how no time, G1 said quietly. Can you walk? Yes. Then follow me. Stay quiet. G1 led Myra through the facility, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints. She had memorized every guard rotation, every camera angle, every potential obstacle. They moved through the station's underbelly, collecting other prisoners along the way. By the time they reached the safe house, G1 had prepared. She had freed 15 people, but as they emerged from the final maintenance shaft, alarms began blaring throughout the station. G1 had been spotted by a camera she hadn't known about. The facility's backup security system had caught her image. Go, she told the freed prisoners, pushing them toward the safe house. There's food, water, and medical supplies inside. Stay hidden. Mira grabbed G1's arm. What about you? I'll be fine, G1 said. She looked at her friend and managed a small smile. I'm good at this. She ran in the opposite direction, deliberately drawing attention away from the others. Behind her, she could hear boots pounding on metal decking. Shouts in multiple languages. The hunt was on. Good.G-1 led them on a chase through the industrial sectors, using the environment to her advantage. She vented atmosphere and corridors behind her, forcing pursuers to detour. She manipulated gravity plating, making some sections impossible to navigate quickly. She turned their own station against them. But Krell was smart. He predicted her movements and set up ambushes. Twice, G1 barely escaped traps designed to corner her. The third time, she found herself pinned down in a cargo bay with ration enforcers closing in from 3 sides. She fought her way through, using improvised weapons and brutal efficiency. A cargo hook became a weapon. Magnetic containers became shields. She moved like water, never staying in one place long enough for them to target effectively. When she finally broke free, she had a dozen new injuries and her clothes were torn and bloody. But she was alive. And the Vraken had learned something terrifying. The quiet human girl they had ignored for 6 months was the deadliest thing on Nexus Prime. Station-wide bulletins went out within the hour. GH1's face appeared on every screen. A bounty was offered, 1 million credits for her capture, dead or alive. Her identity was exposed. Her cover was blown. G-1 made it back to her quarters and gathered her equipment. She couldn't go back to being a simple clerk. That life was over. But she wasn't running away. She looked at the station map displayed on her terminal. The Vraken thought exposing her would make her vulnerable. They were wrong. Now she didn't have to hide what she was. She loaded her weapons and checked her gear. The hunt was just beginning. And the Vraken were about to learn an important lesson about humans. When you corner a human who has something to protect, you don't create a victim. You create something much more dangerous. You create a hunter who won't stop until justice is done. Don't underestimate the quiet girl she hunts without mercy. # Part 3. The hunted becomes the hunter. A station-wide lockdown had been in effect for 3 days. Every sector had checkpoints. Every corridor had patrols. Every screen displayed Ji-won's face with the massive bounty underneath. The Vraken were using every resource they had to find one human woman, and they were failing. G-1 moved through, Nexus Prime like smoke. She used maintenance tunnels and service ducts that didn't appear on official maps. She changed her appearance with simple, different clothes, limp-colored contacts, her hair hidden under a worker's cap. The Vraken were looking for a dangerous operative, so she became invisible again by looking ordinary. Other workers on the station watched the manhunt with mixed feelings. Some were terrified that Ji-won's actions would bring Vraken anger down on everyone. But others felt something they hadn't experienced in years. Hope, the quiet human girl, had done what no one else dared. She had struck back. She had freed prisoners. She had killed Vraken enforcers who had tormented them for so long. And she was still out there, still fighting in the lower decks. A Threen engineer named Torvix made a decision. He left a data chip in a specific maintenance junction, containing current security codes. He didn't leave a note or message. He simply hoped the right person would find it 2 hours later. The chip was gone. That same night, a human dock worker named Marcus forgot to lock a weapons storage container. By morning, several items were missing. But Marcus reported nothing unusual in his logs. Word spread quietly through the oppressed workers. If you wanted to help the human woman, you left information in specific locations. You made mistakes that created opportunities. You looked the other way at the right moments. A resistance was forming, though no one called it that. They were just people who were tired of being afraid. Krell noticed the pattern. The Saurian security chief stood in his command center, studying reports and security footage. He was one of the most experienced hunters in the Vraken organization, and he recognized when prey was becoming predator. "She's not running," he said to his second-in-command. "She's adapting, using the station itself as a weapon, and we'll tear the station apart until we find her," his second replied.
Ow.
Krell's eyes narrowed. "That's what she expects. She wants us to waste resources on random searches while she picks her targets." He pulled up G1's file. Earth's Military Special Operations Division, Deep Cover Specialist, decorated for missions he couldn't even read about because they were classified above his clearance level. She had retired 2 years ago and disappeared. Why? Krell wondered aloud. Why did an elite operative become a data clerk on a nowhere station? He studied her psychological profile. No mention of family. No close connections. But the file noted, subject demonstrates strong protective instincts toward civilian populations. Will prioritize innocent lives above mission parameters. Krell understood. She had come here to escape violence, to live a quiet life. And they had forced her back into the one thing she was best at. That night, Ji-won struck 3 different Vraken operations simultaneously. She used stolen explosives to destroy a trafficking warehouse. She released evidence of Vraken crimes to multiple news networks, and she killed 2 more enforcers who had murdered workers in the past. But the Vraken had learned. They found her helpers and made examples of them. Torvix was executed publicly in the main plaza. Marcus was beaten nearly to death and left in the medical bay as a warning. 3 others disappeared into detention cells. Gi-won watched from hiding as they killed Torvix. Her hands clenched into fists, her jaw tight. These people had helped her, and now they were paying the price. Guilt and rage burned inside her chest. She wanted to attack right then, to make the Vraken pay for every innocent death. But that was emotion talking, not training. Emotional decisions got people killed. She had to think, to plan, to be patient, but it was getting harder to stay patient. Krell was hunting her more effectively now. He predicted her movements, set better traps, and responded faster to her attacks. Twice, she barely escaped ambushes that should have caught her. The Saurian was good, maybe better than anyone she had faced before. Their cat-and-mouse game escalated. Guan would sabotage a Vraken operation, and Krell would track her escape route. She would set a false trail, and he would see through it. Each was learning the other's patterns, adapting and counter-adapting. Finally, Juan decided it was time to change the game. She lured Krell to the industrial section of the station, a maze of machinery and chemical processing equipment. She left a trail obvious enough for him to follow, but subtle enough that he wouldn't suspect a trap. Krell came with only 2 guards, recognizing that large groups would be at a disadvantage in tight spaces. Smart. But Gyuan had planned for that. She disabled the guards first, using the machinery to create distractions and blind spots. Krell heard the sounds of brief struggle, then silence. He found his guards unconscious, disarmed, and secured with their own restraints. "Impressive," he called out, his weapon ready. "Most humans wouldn't have the skill. Most Rakan wouldn't have noticed my trail was bait." Gyuan replied from somewhere above him. "You're better than the others. You're better than your file suggests." Krell moved cautiously through the industrial equipment. "I've read about Earth's special forces. I know what you can do. Then you know I could have killed your guards. I didn't. Because you're not a murderer. You only kill those who deserve it." A figure dropped from the shadows. Krell spun, but Gon was already inside his guard. They fought hand to hand, a brutal exchange of strikes and counters. Krell was strong and fast, but G1 was precise and adaptable. The fight took them through the industrial section, both using the environment. They were evenly matched, both expert fighters recognizing skill in their opponent. Finally, Juan got Krell's weapon and trained it on him. But she didn't fire. Instead, she lowered it slightly. "Walk away," she said. "You don't have to die for them." Krell laughed bitterly. "You think I serve the Vraken by choice?" G1's eyes narrowed. "Explain. They have my family. My mate, my younglings. Vorash keeps them on his personal ship as insurance. I do what he orders, or they die." Krell's expression was full of pain. "I have spent 3 years enslaved to these criminals." Guan was silent for a moment, thinking. Then she made a decision that would change everything. "What if we could free them?" she asked. "What if we could destroy the Vraken completely?" Krell stared at her. "Together? I can't do this alone. The station sees me as one person fighting impossible odds. But if we work together, if we unite everyone who suffered under Vraken rule," one lowered the weapon completely, "we could actually win." Krell studied her face, searching for deception. He found none. This human genuinely believed they could overthrow the organization that controlled Nexus Prime. More than that, she was willing to trust him, despite everything. She saw past his Vraken uniform to the prisoner underneath.
"You would trust me?"
Krell asked. "After I've hunted you, you would trust me? After I've killed your colleagues?" They regarded each other for a long moment. Then Krell reached a decision. He pulled a data chip from his uniform and handed it to G1. "Vraken operational structure. Security protocols. Locations of all key personnel, including Varash's ship." Krell took a breath. "Everything you need to destroy them completely." G1 took the chip. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Vorash is paranoid and prepared. Taking him down won't be easy. Good thing I don't look for easy," G1 said with a slight smile. Together, Human Operative and the Saurian Security Chief began planning the impossible. They would unite the station's oppressed workers, strike at every Vraken operation simultaneously, and free everyone held under the organization's control. The quiet girl wasn't alone anymore, and the Vraken were about to face something they had never imagined. A united force with nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. Don't underestimate the quiet girl she hunts without mercy ##. Part 4. The Alliance Strikes. The planning took 5 days. 5 days of secret meetings, in forgotten corners of Nexus Prime. 5 days of careful coordination between dozens of oppressed workers who had never dared to resist, before Gon and Krell worked from a hidden room deep in the industrial section. The walls were covered with maps, schedules, and tactical plans. Krell provided insider knowledge about Vraken operations that G1 could never have learned alone. In turn, Giwan's military training gave structure to what could have been chaos. The key is simultaneous strikes. Gi-won explained to the small group of resistance leaders gathered around the planning table. If we hit one target, they'll reinforce the others. We need to attack everything at once. Mira, the Centauri mechanic, studied the station map. Her bruises had healed, and fire had replaced the fear in her eyes. The financial servers are in the commercial district. I can lead a team there. I'll take the communications hub, said Rennick, a human engineer who had lost his brother to Vrakan brutality. Cut their coordination. The weapons depot, a Threen named Salvix, volunteered. My people know those corridors well. Juan nodded. Remember, we're not trying to kill everyone. We want to expose them and destroy their capability to harm others. Focus on data, equipment, and key personnel only. Krell asked. He'll see the attacks coming and try to escape. Let him try, Ji-won said quietly. You and I will be waiting. Over the next 3 days, Ji-won trained volunteers in basic combat and sabotage techniques. She wasn't building an army. These were maintenance workers, dock hands, and clerks. But she could teach them how to disable security systems, how to move through the station unseen, and how to defend themselves if cornered. She was impressed by their courage. These people had lived in fear for years, watching friends and family suffer under Vrakan rule. Now, they had a chance to fight back, and they were ready to risk everything. Why are you doing this? Rennick asked one night during training. You could have escaped the station. Why stay and fight our battle? Ji-won paused, remembering Mira being dragged away, Torvik's execution, and all the injustices she had witnessed. Because I'm tired of running from who I am. I tried to be ordinary, to live a quiet life. But some things are worth fighting for. You're not ordinary, Rennick said with a slight smile. You're probably the most dangerous human in this sector. Maybe, Ji-won admitted. But you know what's more dangerous than one trained operative? Dozens of people who have nothing left to lose. While Ji-won trained the resistance, Krell fed false information to Varash's intelligence network. He made it seem like Ji-won was planning to attack the detention facilities again, drawing Vrakan forces away from the real targets. But Vorash was smarter than they hoped. The Vrakan leader started noticing inconsistencies in Krell's reports, small details that didn't quite match other intelligence. He began to suspect his security chief was compromised. On the 4th day, Vorash summoned Krell to his command ship for a routine briefing. It was a trap, and both Krell and Ji-won knew it. Don't go, Ji-won said. He'll kill you. If I don't go, he'll know we're planning something major. He'll accelerate his timeline, maybe evacuate before we're ready. Krell checked his weapon. I have to buy us more time. Then I'm coming with you. Can't. They're looking for you everywhere.
Ow.
Gi-won smiled. That's never stopped me before. She infiltrated Varash's ship disguised as a maintenance technician, hidden among a group doing routine repairs. While Krell attended his briefing, Juan planted listening devices and mapped the ship's layout. She also found what they were looking for, the location where Krell's family was being held. The briefing turned hostile quickly. Vorash accused Krell of betrayal and ordered his guards to arrest him. Krell fought back, trying to escape, but there were too many. He was captured, beaten, and thrown into a holding cell. Gi-won watched through her hidden cameras, calculating her options. She could extract Krell now, but it would alert Vorash and ruin the larger plan. Or she could leave him and proceed with the mission. It wasn't really a choice. She had promised to help Krell free his family. She wouldn't abandon him. But as she prepared to make her move, she received a message on her encrypted com. It was from Krell, sent from his cell using a hidden device. Don't rescue me. Proceed with the plan. My family's location is in the data I gave you. Save them. Complete the mission. Gi-won clenched her jaw. Krell was willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. It was exactly what she would do in his situation, which made it even harder to accept. But then she accessed the ship's internal sensors and discovered something that changed everything. Vorash wasn't just preparing to evacuate, he had ordered the station's main reactor sabotaged. If the Vrakan couldn't control Nexus Prime, they would destroy it and everyone aboard. The timeline had just accelerated. Dramatically, Juan sent emergency messages to all resistance cells. Execute now. All teams, go now. She moved through the ship with lethal efficiency, heading toward the reactor control access point. If Vorash had sabotaged the station's reactor, he would have done it through remote systems on his ship to maintain plausible deniability. Behind her, explosions echoed across Nexus Prime as the resistance struck. The Vrakan financial servers went offline in a cascade of data corruption. The communications hub exploded, cutting off their coordination network. The weapons depot erupted in a fireball that lit up the station's viewports. Alarms blared throughout Vorash's ship. The Vrakan leader was screaming orders, trying to understand how his entire operation was collapsing simultaneously. G-1 reached the reactor control room and found two technicians working frantically to complete the sabotage. They turned in surprise, reaching for weapons, but GI-1 was faster. The fight was brief and brutal. She accessed the control terminal and began working to reverse the sabotage. But the Vrakan had built in multiple redundancies. The reactor was minutes from critical failure. She needed more time she didn't have. Then the door burst open. Krell stumbled in, bloodied but alive, carrying a stolen weapon. I couldn't let you have all the fun. How did your distraction worked? Half the guards ran to defend critical systems. I overpowered the rest. He moved to a second terminal. I know their systems. Tell me what you need. Working together, they began dismantling the sabotage protocols one by one. Outside, the battle for Nexus Prime raged. Resistance fighters clashed with Vrakan enforcers throughout the station. It was chaos, violent, and desperate. But the tide was turning. The oppressed workers of Nexus Prime had found their courage. They weren't trained soldiers, but they outnumbered the Vrakan 10-1. And they were fighting for their home, their families, their freedom. With 3 minutes remaining before reactor breach, G1 and Krell broke through the final security layer. The sabotage protocols began reversing. The reactor's destabilization slowed, then stopped. They had done it. The station was saved, but the battle wasn't over. Vorash still lived, his personal guard still fought, and his ship was preparing for emergency departure. Guan looked at Krell. Your family? Deck 7, Section 12 of this ship. Then let's go get them. They moved through the ship as it shuddered and shook from internal battles. Vorash's crew was panicking, some trying to fight, others attempting to escape. The perfect criminal operation had dissolved into terrified chaos. The quiet girl who had once served, Coffee now led an armed uprising. And the Vrakan were learning what happens when you push humanity too far. They were learning that mercy has limits. And when those limits are crossed, humans will hunt without mercy until justice is served. Don't underestimate the quiet girl she hunts without mercy ## Part 5, The Reckoning. The corridors of Vorash's ship echoed with the sounds of battle. G1 and Krell moved swiftly through the chaos, heading toward the holding cells where Krell's family was imprisoned. Behind them, Nexus Prime burned with revolution. The Resistance had taken control of most major systems, but the cost had been high. 3 Resistance fighters had died taking the communications hub. 5 more had fallen defending the financial servers. Each death weighed on G1's conscience. But she couldn't stop now. Stopping meant their sacrifices were meaningless. This way, Krell said, his weapon ready. They turned a corner and ran into 4 Vrakan guards. The firefight was brief and brutal. Krell's knowledge of Vrakan tactics combined with G1's combat training made them a devastating team. They reached the holding area. Krell's hands shook as he opened the cell door using his security override. Inside were his mate Sina and 2 young Sorience's children. They were thin and frightened, but alive. Krell? Senna's voice broke. Is it really? It's me? I'm getting you out. Krell embraced his family, and for a moment, the hardened security chief looked like just a father who had found his children. G1 stood guard at the door, giving them their moment. Then, alarms throughout the ship reached a new pitch of urgency. We need to move, she said. Vorash will try to escape. If he reaches hyperspace, we lose our evidence, and he rebuilds somewhere else. Krell nodded, helping his family to their feet. I'll get them to safety. You stop, Vorash. Alone. You've been doing this alone from the beginning. Krell met her eyes. Finish it. For everyone who suffered under him? Ji-Wan gave him a quick nod, then ran toward the ship's command deck. She could hear Varash's voice echoing through the ship's intercom, screaming orders at his remaining crew. The Vrakan leader was panicking, his perfect control crumbling. The route to the command deck took her through the ship's engine room. There she found something unexpected, Mira, leading a team of resistance fighters who had boarded the ship through a docking port. Ji-Wan. Myra's face lit up. We saw Vorash's ship preparing to leave. Couldn't let that happen. The command deck already on it. Rennick's team is cutting off escape routes. Salvix disabled their hyperspace drive. Vorash isn't going anywhere. Ji-Wan felt a surge of pride. She had trained these people, but they had taken initiative on their own. They weren't victims anymore. They were fighters. Cover the exits, Ji-Wan ordered. I'm going after Vorash. She sprinted through the ship's corridors, her combat knife in one hand and a stolen Vrakan weapon in the other. Guards tried to stop her, but she was a storm of precise violence. Every movement was efficient, every strike lethal when necessary. The command deck doors were sealed, but Ji-Wan had learned Vrakan security. Systems from Krell, she overrode the locks and burst through, to find Vorash surrounded by his personal guard 6. Of his most elite enforcers, the Vrakan leader turned to face her. He was massive, easily twice her size, covered in scars from decades of violence. His eyes held pure hatred. The human clerk, he said with contempt. You've cost me everything. You cost yourself everything, Ji-Wan replied. You could have run a legitimate business. Instead, you chose to hurt people. This is the consequence. You think you've won? I've killed hundreds like you. Humans are weak, fragile things. You'll die here, and I'll rebuild. You've never met anyone like me. Barash gestured to his guards. Kill her. They attacked as a coordinated unit, professional and deadly. But Ji-Wan had fought trained warriors across a dozen worlds. She used the command deck's equipment as weapons and shields. Turning their numbers against them in the confined space, the first guard fell with a broken knee and a crushed windpipe. The second took a blade to his primary nerve cluster. The third and fourth went down when Ji-Wan triggered an emergency bulkhead release that pinned them against a wall. The fifth guard nearly got her. His blade cut across her shoulder, drawing blood. But Ji-Wan channeled the pain into fury, disarmed him, and knocked him unconscious with his own weapon. The sixth guard, seeing his companions defeated, ran Ji-Wan and Vorash stood alone. She was bleeding, exhausted, and had been fighting for hours. Vorash was fresh, larger, stronger. But Ji-Wan had something he didn't. Absolute conviction. Last chance, she said. Surrender. Face justice through proper channels. Vorash laughed and charged. The fight was savage. Vorash's strength against Ji-Wan's skill. His rage against her precision. They crashed through the command deck, destroying equipment and consoles. Vorash was winning through sheer power. He caught Ji-Wan and threw her against a wall hard enough to crack her ribs. She struggled to breathe, to move. But he was already advancing for the killing blow. Then the command deck doors burst open. Resistance fighters poured in Mira, Rennick, Salvix, and dozens more. They had fought their way through the entire ship to reach this point. Vorash froze, suddenly understanding. He wasn't facing one human. He was facing everyone he had ever oppressed, everyone he had ever hurt, all united against him. It's over, Ji-Wan said, getting to her feet despite her injuries. You lose. Galactic Authority's ships appeared outside the viewports, responding to the emergency signals and evidence that resistance hackers had broadcast across multiple systems. The crimes of the Vrakan Consortium were now public knowledge across a dozen sectors. Vorash was arrested and taken into custody. His personal ship was seized as evidence. The remaining Vrakan on Nexus Prime surrendered or were captured. The battle was over. The station was free. The aftermath took weeks to sort out. Galactic Authority investigators documented every crime, every victim, every injustice. The evidence Jiwan and the resistance had gathered ensured the Vrakin consortium's complete dismantling across multiple star systems. Krell was offered immunity in exchange for his testimony. He reunited with his family and accepted a position training security forces on proper law enforcement. He had been a victim too, and he wanted to ensure others wouldn't face the same. The resistance fighters became heroes, their names remembered. Torvix and the others who had died were honored in a memorial built in the station's main. Plaza.G1 spent 3 weeks in the medical bay recovering from her injuries. Doctors said she was lucky to be alive. She had cracked ribs, a severe concussion, internal bleeding, and dozens of cuts and bruises. But she would heal. Representatives from Earth's military came to visit. They offered her reinstatement at a higher rank, command of her own unit, medals, and recognition. She declined. "I didn't do this for recognition," she told them. "I did it because it needed to be done." But she didn't return to hiding either. The station needed proper security, people who would protect rather than exploit. G1 accepted a position training Nexus Prime's new civilian defense force. 2 months after the revolution, G1 sat in the same cantina where her story had begun. Workers greeted her respectfully as they passed. Some nodded. Others smiled. A few brought her drinks she hadn't ordered. She wasn't invisible anymore. She couldn't be, even if she wanted to. Her face was known across the sector. The quiet girl who had changed everything. A young woman approached hesitantly. She was human, probably 17 or 18 standard years, with nervous eyes and uncertain posture. "Excuse me," the girl said quietly. Are you G1 Kim?" "I am. I wanted to thank you. My mother worked in the detention facilities. She was going to be sent to the labor camps, but you freed her before they could transfer her." The girl's eyes were wet with tears. "You saved her life." Jiwan felt a warmth in her chest. This was why she fought. Not for glory or recognition, but for moments like this. "I'm glad she's safe. Would you teach me?" the girl asked. "How to defend myself. How to stand up to people who hurt others." G1 studied the girl's face. She saw determination there, hidden beneath the nervousness. She saw potential. "What's your name?" "Minji." "Okay, Minji. Training starts tomorrow at 0700. Be ready to work hard." Minji's face lit up with joy. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As the girl left, Myra slid into the seat across from G1. The Centauri mechanic had been promoted to chief engineer and wore her new position with pride. "Starting a new generation of troublemakers?" Mira asked with a grin. "Teaching people to protect themselves," G1 corrected. "There's a difference, is there? You turned a data clerk into a revolutionary. It was always more than a data clerk." "I just forgot for a while." Myra's expression became serious. "Do you think it's really over?" "The Vrakin. This branch of them? Yes. But there will always be others. People who think power means they can hurt the weak." Guan looked out the cantina window at Nexus Prime's busy corridors. "But there will also always be people willing to stand up to them. People like you. People like all of us," Juwan said. "I didn't free this station alone. It took everyone, you, Rennick, Krell, Torvix, Marcus, all the others. We did it together, but you started it. You showed us it was possible." Guan was quiet for a moment. "Maybe, but you know what's funny? I came here trying to escape violence, trying to be ordinary. I thought if I kept quiet, stayed invisible, I could leave that part of my life behind, and now